was a rainy Thanksgiving, and our small family was gathered for dinner at my mom's house. Just her, my two sisters, our grandparents, and me. Nancy, my older sister, had long since moved out, while Jamie and I still lived at home. Grandma and Grandpa lived only 20 minutes away and were bringing their famous sourdough stuffing, along with Grandma's prized silver-handled whisk, the one she swore made the gravy perfect. But that year, the air felt different, heavy, and uneasy, not just from the constant rain that had turned the afternoon light into a dull gray. By 4:30, Grandma still hadn't arrived, and the familiar warmth of our usual Thanksgiving rhythm began to falter. Around 5:15, Mom finally looked at the clock with a frown. They're late. Grandma's never late. Jamie, my younger sister, immediately went to the window, pulling back the curtain and staring into the downpour. "It's the rain, Mom. Their roads are a lot windier than ours. Maybe a washout or something." Jamie was always the overreactor. Any deviation from the norm sent her anxiety spiking. Nancy, my older sister, who was the definitive skeptic, barely looked up from slicing the turkey breast. Or maybe she just forgot the time. "She's 80, Mom. Give her a minute." Mom tried calling their landline, which was the only way to reach them, but it went straight to a busy signal. After the third try, she started to panic. "The stuffing needs that whisk. I can't do the gravy without it. It just won't be right." This was less about the food and more about her need for things to be perfectly ordered. Finally, at 5:30, after a flurry of escalating anxiety, I volunteered. "I'll go get it. Their house is only 20 minutes. If their car broke down or something, I can help, or at least grab the stuffing and the whisk." I was the calm thinker, the one who tried to impose logic on the chaos. Jamie immediately latched onto the idea. "I'm coming with you. I hate waiting here." She grabbed her jacket before anyone could object. Mom handed me the spare key, which was still attached to an old ceramic bird keychain. "It's under the ceramic gnome by the back door, but take the one on the key ring. And be careful, Alex. The rain is biblical." The drive was exactly as bad as advertised. The old, winding country roads to my grandparents' house were slick with wet leaves, and the wipers couldn't keep up with the deluge. Jamie was vibrating next to me, clicking the seatbelt buckle in and out. "I really don't like this, Alex. Why didn't they call? They have their cell phones for emergencies." "They only turn the emergency ones on for emergencies, Jamie," I reminded her. "You know how they are. They probably just got delayed and thought we'd assume the rain was the issue." After what felt like 40 minutes, we finally pulled up to their property. And that's when the first spike of real uncertainty hit me. My grandparents' house was a beacon of light. It was an old farmhouse, and they kept every window blazing from the moment the sun dipped below the horizon. Tonight, however, it was almost completely dark. A single, weak light, a yellowish glow, seeped from the small pantry window next to the back porch. The rest of the house was a heavy black shape against the gray sky. "See, they're not even home," Jamie whispered, her voice tight. "Let's just go back. They obviously got stuck somewhere." "Hold on," I said, pulling the car into the gravel driveway. The first real, cold drop of dread landed in my stomach. The biggest, most glaring absence was their Buick. The car they used for everything, the car they had to have driven to Mom's house, wasn't there. But if they had already left, why was the house pitch black? And why wasn't Mom answering their phone? I turned off the ignition, plunging us into silence, broken only by the incessant drumming of the rain on the roof. If they left, the kitchen light would still be on, and the garage door would be locked. "Let's just check the back door, grab the whisk, and leave. It'll take 2 minutes." I was trying to sound authoritative, but my own voice felt hollow. We dashed through the pouring rain to the back porch. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth and something else, a faint, metallic scent I couldn't place. I went straight for the ceramic gnome, felt beneath it, and retrieved the house key. My hands were shaking slightly. The key turned smoothly in the lock. I pushed the heavy oak door open, and the silence inside hit us like a physical force. The pantry light was indeed on, illuminating a small, dust-caked counter and rows of canning jars. But the main kitchen, which was normally filled with the faint scent of potpourri and old wood, was cold, dark, and utterly silent. "Hello?" I called out, the sound swallowed immediately by the oppressive atmosphere. Jamie stayed glued to my back. "Alex, just the whisk. Let's get it. And go. I swear, I smell gas." I ignored her, moving into the kitchen. The kitchen was always the heart of their home. Now, it felt preserved, like a museum exhibit. But as I flipped on the overhead light, a single fluorescent bulb sputtering to life, I noticed the first thing that was truly wrong. The kitchen island was empty, save for a single, half-eaten sandwich on a plate, the bread starting to curl slightly at the edges, and a glass of milk with a film forming on the surface. It was a still life of abandonment. They had been interrupted. "The whisk isn't here," I murmured, checking the utensil jar. "They must have taken it." "Then we leave," Jamie pleaded, pulling on my arm. But my eyes had drifted to the entryway leading into the dining room. I took a deep breath, pushing down the rising panic, and walked slowly toward the archway. When I looked into the room, I froze. The old mahogany dining table, which my grandmother only set once or twice a year, was meticulously prepared. The good linen tablecloth, the expensive silverware, the crystal water glasses, it was all there. But there was something terribly, fundamentally wrong with the scale of it. My family, including the grandparents, totaled 7. The table was set, not for 7, but for 11. The 4 extra place settings weren't the same. They were mismatched, older china, faded, chipped white plates with an unfamiliar black floral pattern. They looked like they had been pulled from the deepest recesses of an antique store, or perhaps a forgotten part of the attic. "Alex, who were the extra plates for?" Jamie whispered, her voice barely a thread. She was staring at the 4 odd settings arranged side by side on the far side of the table. Before I could rationalize it, maybe my grandmother got confused. Maybe she's trying a new seating arrangement. A noise cut through the rain. It was a faint, rhythmic sound, a dull thump that seemed to originate from the floorboards beneath our feet. It was coming from the basement, and it sounded like something heavy being deliberately dragged across concrete. I instinctively knew 2 things. 1, the kitchen whisk was irrelevant, and 2, we were not alone. The basement door, which was normally secured by a heavy wooden bolt, was slightly ajar, casting a sliver of inky blackness onto the hardwood floor. The thumping stopped. The silence that followed was so profound, it felt like a heavy, physical pressure in my chest. The rain outside, which had been a deafening drumbeat, suddenly sounded miles away. I stood there, caught between the sheer panic urging me to bolt and the deeper, colder curiosity that told me I had to know what had stopped the noise. The mismatched place settings, the 11 guests, the half-eaten sandwich. It was all a silent, terrifying contradiction, and whatever had made that sound was the key. "Alex, please," Jamie whimpered, her voice a thin, panicked thread. She grabbed a fistful of my jacket, dragging me back toward the kitchen door. "We need to go. Now." Before whatever that was, I gently detached her hand. "Listen to me. If they're in trouble, we can't just leave. We have to check." I didn't believe the words, but I had to say them. The calm thinker voice was a shield against the crippling fear. I moved slowly toward the basement door. As I stepped closer, the faint, metallic scent I had noticed outside grew stronger. It wasn't gas, and it wasn't earth. It was a cold, coppery smell. I looked down, and in the faint spill of light from the pantry, I saw it. A small, damp smear on the polished wood floor just by the doorframe. It was the color of dark wine, not quite dry. I pushed the heavy door open fully. The darkness inside was absolute, a tangible void that seemed to suck the light out of the room. A wave of cold air washed over me, smelling of old, damp concrete and something else acrid, faintly chemical. I fumbled for the light switch mounted on the doorframe and flipped it. Nothing. The bulb must have been dead. "Stay here," I muttered to Jamie, pulling out my phone and turning on the flashlight. "No, I'm not staying here," she hissed, but she didn't follow me onto the top landing of the stairs. She just stood frozen, hands clasped over her mouth. The beam of my phone cut a narrow, shaky tunnel through the blackness. The stairs were steep, old concrete, the kind that amplified every footfall. I took them one at a time, moving as quietly as I could, the psychological fear of being watched intensifying with every descending step. The basement floor was a large, open space. I scanned the room slowly. Old furniture, stacks of decaying boxes, the furnace in the corner. The sound of the thumping suddenly made sense. On the far side of the room, near an old potato cellar my grandfather had walled off decades ago, a massive, antique cedar chest, heavy enough to require 2 people to move, was lying on its side. It looked like it had been violently shoved. There were scuff marks on the concrete floor, leading from the base of the stairs, around a supporting column, and stopping near the overturned chest. It wasn't the chest that had been thumping. The chest had been an obstacle. Something else, something heavy, had been dragged across the concrete and then concealed. My flashlight beam danced across a cluttered workbench nearby. Among the rusty saws and hammers, I noticed a collection of tools that were completely alien to my grandfather's orderly habits. They were thin, clean, and strangely reflective tools that looked less like carpentry implements and more like something a butcher or a surgeon would use. A small, dark red stain was clearly visible on the edge of the bench. It was then I saw the whisk. Lying on the concrete, right next to the overturned cedar chest, was a flash of silver. Grandma's prized silver-handled whisk. But it wasn't just dropped. The thick silver handle was bent at an impossible angle, snapped violently in half, the 2 jagged ends separated by a few inches. And all around it, scattered like fine snow, was a dust that looked like flour or dried plaster. The logical part of my brain, the calm thinker, finally disintegrated. The half-eaten sandwich meant they were interrupted. The table set for 11 meant they were expecting extra guests, ones they hadn't told us about. The broken whisk meant a struggle. The surgical-looking tools and the drag marks meant that something or someone had been moved, and they weren't meant to be found. The sight of the broken whisk, a symbol of my grandmother's comforting tradition, lying in that cold, silent cellar, was the climax of my psychological terror. It was an insult to the order of the world. A sharp, choked sob from the top of the stairs jolted me. Jamie had seen it, too. I didn't try to investigate the scuff marks further. Didn't try to find what was under the chest. My instinct for survival instantly overrode every other thought. I spun around, scrambling back up the concrete steps, heart hammering against my ribs. We didn't speak a word. We sprinted back across the dining room, past the terrifyingly serene table set for 11, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the biblical rain. As I threw the car into reverse, the tires spinning wildly on the wet gravel, I glanced up at the house one final time. The small, yellowish light from the pantry window, the only light we had seen when we arrived, was now completely extinguished. The entire house was a solid, impenetrable block of black, but pressed against the inside of the glass, clear in the light of my reversing headlights, was a faint, pale, lingering outline. It was a perfect, unnaturally large handprint, smeared into the condensation on the inside of the window. And as the car fishtailed onto the main road, the rain seemed to wash the image away. We made it back to Mom's house in record time, breathless and soaked. We told them about the dark house, the extra settings, and the terrible smell. We carefully omitted the broken whisk and the surgical tools. Jamie was hysterical, my mom was panicking, and Nancy, the skeptic, immediately called the police, convinced it was a botched robbery. My grandparents were found 2 days later, 100 miles away, wandering along a highway rest stop. They were unharmed but profoundly confused, claiming they had left for our house around 4:30 and had no memory of the 2 missing days. They insisted the house had been locked and dark when they left. The police found nothing unusual in the house, no forced entry, no signs of a struggle. The silver whisk was gone. They dismissed the extra table settings as an elderly woman's confusion, but they never explained why the dining table was set for 11, and I could never forget that unnaturally large, pale handprint on the inside of the pantry window. Every time I see a Thanksgiving table set perfectly, I count the plates. And every time, I wonder who the other 4 guests were meant to be, and what, or who, was being dragged through the dark basement while the rain pounded outside. The year I was 23, Thanksgiving was a logistical nightmare. My parents had just finalized their divorce, and my mother, bless her heart, insisted on hosting the most picture-perfect holiday of all time to prove she was thriving. This meant inviting her entire extended, judgmental side of the family, plus a new acquaintance she'd made at her book club, a man named Mr. Silas. Silas is a gem, Max, she'd gushed, arranging the centerpiece. He's just moved to town, doesn't have family nearby, and he's an intellectual, a true gentleman. We need to be welcoming. I was cynical, a graduate student perpetually stressed and short on sleep. I was the skeptic in this scenario, convinced Mr. Silas was either a lonely weirdo or a pyramid scheme salesman. The house was chaotic. My Aunt Sarah was the overreactor, constantly fretting over the gravy's consistency and the children's proximity to the good china. My cousin, Mark, was the calm thinker, quietly retreating to the porch with his earbuds, determined to ride out the storm of forced festivity. I spent the afternoon on cleanup duty, trying to avoid being drawn into the fray. Mr. Silas arrived precisely at 4 p.m. He wasn't what I expected. He was maybe 55, impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket and wool trousers, with a precise, almost clinical tidiness about him. His voice was soft, melodic, and he had an uncanny knack for listening. He didn't dominate the room, but he held the attention of whoever he was talking to with a quiet, intense focus. The moment he walked in, a subtle change occurred. The anxious, competitive energy of the family gathering seemed to settle. He started by complimenting Mom's house in a sincere, detailed way, not just a vague, nice place, but a specific observation about the vintage molding in the entryway. He then engaged my Uncle Ted, a notorious bore, in a deep, fascinating conversation about local history, making Ted feel like the most interesting man in the room. He even managed to calm Aunt Sarah's gravy panic with a single, gentle suggestion about adding a pinch of dried thyme. By 5:30, the whole family was enchanted. Mom was glowing. Aunt Sarah was now laughing easily, sipping wine with him. Even Mark had come in from the porch, drawn by the unusual sound of genuine, relaxed conversation. I was the only one who felt a creeping sense of unease. His charm was too perfect. His reactions were too measured. He was a flawless mirror, reflecting exactly what each person wanted to see. He had no edges. He was unsettlingly, inhumanly good at being a guest. During dinner, the feeling intensified. I was seated next to him. He was a moderate eater, only taking small, deliberate portions, which he consumed with slow, almost ritualistic care. "Max, your mother tells me you're studying psychology," he said, turning his quiet, deep-set eyes toward me. "That's right. Specifically, cognitive behavior." "Fascinating," he replied, dipping his head slightly. "You study the architecture of the mind. Do you ever feel, when you look at people, that their true architecture is hidden? That the facade is not just a polite social construct, but a carefully engineered structure meant to conceal something utterly other?" It was a strange, pointed question. I found myself leaning in, despite my skepticism. "We all have masks, Mr. Silas. It's called socialization." He smiled, but his eyes didn't quite join in. "Yes, the mask. But imagine a different kind of mask. Not one that hides a messy, flawed human, but one that hides an empty space. An absence that is trying desperately to mimic presence." The conversation was unsettling, but it was also the first truly interesting thing that had happened all day. I was pulled into a deep, intense focus, my initial cynicism replaced by a growing curiosity. Later, as the evening wound down, Mom asked Mr. Silas to share a Thanksgiving reflection. He stood, tall and composed, holding his crystal water glass. "Thank you, Carol," he said, his voice carrying clearly but softly through the room. "The true meaning of Thanksgiving is not gratitude for what we have, but gratitude for what we understand. We understand that we are social creatures. We understand the rules of the group. We understand that to be accepted, we must conform. We must present the perfect self." He paused, and his eyes swept across the room, meeting mine for a fraction of a second too long. A cold shiver traced down my spine. "And sometimes," he continued, a thread of something hard entering his voice, "the best way to understand the architecture of the perfect family gathering is to simply walk in, observe, and fill the necessary role. To become the perfect guest." The atmosphere in the room, which had been so relaxed, suddenly became brittle. The speech was too cold, too analytical. He was still smiling, but the reflection in his eyes, the way they were moving from face to face, analyzing, was deeply unnerving. He wasn't talking about gratitude. He was talking about infiltration. He sat down, and the brittle moment passed as Mom immediately jumped in with a nervous laugh to suggest dessert. Everyone had found his speech unusual, but no one, except perhaps me, had found it truly sinister. He was just an intellectual, a little eccentric. I couldn't shake the feeling of being studied, of being quantified. I needed to know more about this man. I slipped away to the den and quickly searched his name on my phone. Nothing. No social media. No local news articles. No professional profile. It was like he didn't exist until my mother had invited him in. When I returned to the living room, a terrible, unexpected twist was already in progress. Aunt Sarah was having an argument with my cousin Mark, a screaming match in the hallway. "You took it, Mark. It was right here." Aunt Sarah was hysterical, pointing at the end table. "I didn't take your stupid gold locket, Aunt Sarah." "What are you talking about?" Mark yelled back. "It wasn't a locket, Sarah," Uncle Ted cut in, confused. "It was a porcelain figurine. You told me you put the porcelain swan here." "No, it was a gold locket." "No, it was a miniature silver box," Aunt Sarah's husband shouted. The entire family was descending into chaos. Suddenly, everyone was accusing everyone else of taking a small, personal, sentimental object, but the descriptions of the object were wildly different. A priceless bracelet, a rare antique coin, a favorite silver fountain pen, and the theft, they all agreed, had happened right now. Mr. Silas sat calmly on the sofa, watching the escalating confusion with the detached curiosity of a zoologist observing a new species. "It seems," he observed mildly, without raising his voice, "that the stress of the day is getting to everyone. Perhaps a glass of water?" His calmness was the catalyst. My focus snapped from the family fighting to the man sitting in the eye of the storm. To be accepted, we must conform. To become the perfect guest. He wasn't just a perfect guest. He was a silent, psychological orchestrator. He hadn't taken anything physical. He had taken something far more valuable. He had stolen their certainty. I walked over to the man on the couch, the adrenaline finally starting to pump, pushing me into the terrifying realization. "What are you doing here?" I asked him, my voice barely a whisper, but laced with a new, cold clarity. He looked up at me, his face showing nothing but polite concern. "Why, Max, I am a guest. I am simply observing the beautiful architecture of a family in distress." He tapped his temple with a perfectly manicured finger. "I was merely testing the integrity of their memories. It is fascinating how fragile identity is when a small, insignificant fact is manipulated." I understood then. He was planting subtle, competing suggestions. He was sowing seeds of doubt, not for the objects, but for the relationships themselves. The objects weren't the point, the distrust was. The goal was to dismantle the perfect family illusion from the inside, by turning them against each other. "You're not a guest," I said, my voice shaking. "You're a parasite." He smiled, a wide, unsettlingly empty expression. A parasite provides the final test of a system's resilience, and I'm quite satisfied with this test. It seems your family is sufficiently tender. He stood up, putting his water glass down slowly and precisely on the coaster. The family was still screaming in the hallway. "I have what I came for," he said, zipping up his tweed jacket. "The perfect memory of the perfect breakdown. Thank you for the insights, Max." He walked out of the living room, gliding past the arguing family members, none of whom seemed to notice his departure. He was already forgotten. His presence dissolved the moment his purpose was fulfilled. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? That the perfect, charming guest was a psychological predator who had come to ruin their Thanksgiving by subtly breaking their collective memory? The family spent the next 2 hours recovering, apologizing, and ultimately agreeing that they must have all been confused and that nothing was actually missing. But the evening was ruined. A persistent, subtle air of suspicion lingered. Later that night, as I was locking up, I found a small, neatly folded piece of paper tucked under my pillow. It was not a note. It was a perfectly detailed, hand-drawn architectural blueprint of our house. Every room, every closet, every hidden space was meticulously mapped out. But in the center of the kitchen, where my mother usually stood, a single sentence was written in thin, precise script. "The next study will be longitudinal. Expect me." I never saw Mr. Silas again, but I look at every new face in my mother's life with a fear that is not about physical danger, but about the terrifying, cold-blooded precision of a mind that knows exactly how to tear down yours. My family never really got over that Thanksgiving. The perfect guest had created a perfect crack, and the rain of suspicion never truly stopped seeping in. My Thanksgiving tradition was always to go completely off the grid. After the forced smiles and excessive chatter of the family feast, which, after the Silas incident, I actively tried to keep small and quiet, I craved silence. That year, I convinced my two best friends, Maya and Ben, to join me for a post-holiday detox in a rented cabin deep in the Allegheny National Forest. Maya was my version of the overreactor, highly sensitive, a true believer in the occult, and prone to dramatic pronouncements. Ben, bless him, was the perpetual skeptic, a finance guy who believed every mystery had a rational, spreadsheet-ready explanation. I, as usual, was the one trying to steer the middle course, the calm thinker until I couldn't be. The cabin we rented was old, remote, and nestled right against a colossal, impenetrable wall of woods. It was built in the 1932, constructed of dark, unvarnished logs, and it had exactly 0 bars of cell service. Perfection. We arrived late Friday afternoon. The air was frigid, and the sky had that specific, bruised purple color that precedes a snowstorm. The cabin was exactly as advertised, rustic, with a massive stone fireplace and dusty, moth-eaten blankets. "It's charmingly murdery," Maya announced, immediately inspecting the chimney for ghosts. "It's $60 a night and requires a fire to stay above freezing." Ben countered, already stacking firewood. "It's cheap." The first night was great. We ate leftovers, drank cheap wine, and told stories. The sense of being truly isolated, trapped in a good way, was exactly what I needed. The strangeness started on Saturday morning. I woke up to a faint, rhythmic sound, like someone gently tapping wood outside. I checked the windows, but all I saw was the thick fog of the forest, and a single pair of clean, precise footsteps leading from the back porch toward the tree line. The ground was slightly damp, but still held the impression of a boot. The steps were too large to be mine or Maya's, and Ben hadn't been outside yet. "Hey, Ben," I called out, pulling on a sweater. "Did you go out and walk into the woods already?" "Nope. Just woke up," he mumbled from his sleeping bag. I dismissed it as a park ranger or maybe the property owner checking in. But as I walked to the kitchen, I noticed something else. The porch light, which we had left on overnight, was now completely unscrewed. The bulb was lying on the deck railing, and the screws that held the fixture were arranged neatly on the small wooden table next to it, arranged in a perfect, small circle. "Anyone see that?" I asked, holding up the bulb. Maya immediately gasped. "A sign! This forest has spirits. They don't like light." Ben rolled his eyes, the skeptic in full force. "It's the wind, Mason. The fixture is loose. It unscrewed itself. The wind probably blew the screws out, and they happened to land in a circle. It's a statistical anomaly, not a ritual." I wasn't convinced. The bulb had been tight the night before, and the screws were too neatly placed. But I didn't want to start an argument, so I just rescrewed the fixture, tightened the bulb, and we started our day hike. The hike was beautiful, but I felt a growing subtle psychological fear, the feeling of being watched. Every time I looked over my shoulder, the trees were just trees, dark, uniform, and silent. Yet the persistent sense that an invisible audience was tracking our movements never left me. When we returned, a little before dusk, the second and more dramatic occurrence had taken place. The front door of the cabin was standing ajar. We stopped dead on the porch. "Did you lock it?" Maya whispered, clutching my arm. "I definitely locked it," I replied, feeling a cold dread replacing the hiking warmth. I used the deadbolt. "Robbery, then," Ben announced, pulling out his multi-tool, ready to be the hero. "A squatter or a local looking for supplies. Stay behind me." We moved inside cautiously. Nothing was missing. No drawers were pulled out. No bags had been rifled through. Our food supplies were intact, but the cabin had been rearranged. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. The 3 worn leather armchairs that had been facing the fireplace were now turned to face the front door. My backpack, which I had tossed on the small dining table, was now propped neatly against the wall, its zipper open and my clothes folded inside. The cheap plastic chess set we had been using the night before was set up on the coffee table, the white pieces facing the now watching chairs, as if a game was waiting to begin. "Okay, this is messed up," Ben admitted, finally losing his skepticism. "A robber would take something. This is creepy." Maya was shivering, her face pale. "They're watching us. They know we're here." The atmosphere was electric with uncertainty. It was not a violent act, but a theatrical one. Someone had been inside, studied our habits, and rearranged our space to make a statement. I know how you live, and I control your environment. The fear of being intruded upon, and the cold realization that our private space had been psychologically invaded, was overwhelming. That night, we barricaded the doors with furniture and took turns keeping watch. The wind picked up, howling through the pines and rattling the windows. Around 2 a.m., it was my shift. I was staring into the dancing shadows of the fireplace, holding a dusty poker, when I heard it. It wasn't a thump or a scream. It was a faint, human sound, coming from the back of the cabin, the small, windowless utility closet next to the bathroom. It was the sound of someone singing. It was a slow, gravelly baritone, humming a tune that was familiar but impossible to place. It sounded like an old, children's nursery rhyme, but the notes were stretched and distorted, made almost terrifying by the quiet confidence of the singer. I froze, adrenaline flooding my system. The sound was definitely coming from inside the cabin, from the utility closet. I crept towards the door, heart slamming against my ribs. I looked at Ben and Maya, asleep on the pull-out couch, and knew I couldn't wake them yet, not without knowing what I was dealing with. I had to maintain the calm thinker facade one last time. I pressed my ear against the thin wood. The singing stopped. Silence. Then, a slow, audible sniff. The sound of someone breathing, wetly, right on the other side of the door. Then, a whisper. So close, and so low it felt like it was inside my ear. I like the quiet ones best. They watch and they learn. The voice was deep, resonant, and utterly calm. It wasn't threatening, it was purely observational, like a note in a ledger. And I knew instantly it was talking about me, the calm thinker. The one who noticed the circle of screws and the moved furniture. Pure panic took over. I didn't reach for the poker. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of old magazines. The noise was deafening in the silence of the cabin. Ben and Maya shot up, terrified. "What was that?" Ben yelled. "The closet! Someone's in the closet!" I screamed. Ben, the former skeptic, now a man in full fight or flight, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher and lunged for the utility closet door. He ripped it open and jammed the extinguisher inside, ready to spray. The closet was empty. Just a water heater, some dusty pipes, and a stack of towels. Ben turned to me, his chest heaving. "Mason, there's nothing here. What did you hear?" I heard singing, and then he spoke. He said he liked the quiet ones. My voice was trembling, my denial mechanism fighting the terrifying reality of what I'd just experienced. Maya ran into the bathroom, flicking on the light. "Wait, look!" On the small, fogged-up mirror above the sink, written into the condensation at eye level, was a single word. It was written in a clean, perfect script, clearly made by a deliberate finger. Scene. We packed up in a blind, terrified rush. It took us 10 minutes to throw our bags in the car and speed off. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was the cabin, dark and still, sitting like a predator in the looming forest. We never found out who it was. The police had no records of recent disturbances in the area. But that was the moment I realized the ultimate psychological horror. It wasn't a monster or a killer. It was someone who knew how to enter your life, rearrange your reality, and then leave no evidence that they were ever there. It was the feeling of being perfectly known by a complete stranger. I moved apartments, changed my number, and stopped telling people about my little tradition. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, staring out into the dark, I see the small, perfect circle of screws in my mind. And I can still hear that deep, calm voice, a ghost from a long ago Thanksgiving, telling me that I am the one he likes best. I am the one who watches, and he is the one who watches me. I am permanently trapped in the reflection of that fogged mirror. I am permanently seen.